We're live. For any of you who might have watched Dieter and I doing a live spontaneous broadcast last week, we were in rare form. So we just, that just comes to mind when we do this. So welcome, Capt Ron here with Captain Merrick and Dieter Staudinger, First Officer Dieter Staudinger. We're here once again for our weekly episode of Fearless Flight Live, which is our show and our contribution to help people who are afraid to fly, know somebody who's afraid to fly, or just like to keep tabs on the airline industry. And there's been quite a bit to keep tabs on this year. We're here to support you in your efforts to overcome your fear of flying. I'm going to find, I didn't get to it today, but I'm going to find some statistics on a couple of things. How many people actually seek help? I kind of have an idea. It's about 10%. And when they seek help, how many of them, get over it, and what period of time? And I think it's going to be similar to some of the things that I saw in the addiction world with people who break substance abuse, stuff like that. It's like a bell-shaped curve, of course. Most people in the middle, it's not overnight, and that's why we're going to talk a little bit about our live our Fearless Flight. Fearless Flyer Club, which meets on the third Thursday of each month. And we're going to talk a little bit about what happened last week and try to encourage more of you to join efforts in that. If it was my money and I had limited budget, that's the first thing I'd do, I'd get involved in that. That's going to give you the most support of just about anything we do. What have you been up to, Eric?
Well, I went back to the Midwest feeling homesick. I still have a very small amount of my parents' stuff and one of my buddies' outbuildings, and I kind of had a switch flip on my head that I got to move this stuff out. I got to do something with it. It's not up on him to store my stuff, even though he doesn't care. And we were going to fly his Cessna 210 and a 1946 Aranca Champion, and I told everybody we're going to post pictures of it. It was less than 30 degrees every morning with winds greater than 30 knots. So
wow.
Not only we would have frozen and died, we couldn't even get the airplane out of the hangar to taxi it. So all that was just plan B. I got to go back and do it later, and just plowed through some estate stuff, and was really glad when I got on the airplane to come home, as cold as it was. And we would have de-iced in Des Moines, if the humidity hadn't been real close to zero, it would have been just caked with ice, but it wasn't. It was clean. It was very cold.
How do you spell A-E-R-O?
A-E-R-O-N-C-A, Aranca Champion.
Oh yeah, here we go.
Yeah, it just got reskinned. It's beautiful.
Oh my gosh. Okay.
Screaming horsepower.
All right, I'm gonna try and get this up on the screen. Oh man, yeah, here we go. We're gonna try and share that. That I'll tell you why in just a minute. So, have you flown a Champ before?
Not a Champ. I have some extensive tail dragger time and other kind of planes. And my buddy and I were already arguing. It doesn't have anything complicated like an electrical system, so you don't have to annoy yourself with talking to people. But it also has no starter. So we were already arguing who was going to be in the plane and who's going to be ripping the propeller through to start it so we could go.
All right, so you can see that, right?
Yeah, that's it. That's perfect. That's a great shot.
Yeah, I have a little bit of history of that too. When I was at the Air Force Academy, I wasn't a pilot yet, and the woman who ended up being my wife that I was dating at the time, her father was he was too young for World War I, too old for World War II. But he had a 4-digit pilot's license.
Oh man.
Mine had 9. And I was totally impressed with that. I mean, so you're talking, it was in the 4,000s or something like that. So he was one of the first aviators in history. And so we went out there, and he loved. I was the only one to go fly with him, and we went out in that little sucker, and it was a gas.
See that thing that your black pointer is right next to? That's a that's a Venturi to drive the only gyro in the airplane.
Yeah,
Turn coordinator. But
tell people what, so what's a Venturi and what does it do?
so that thing makes suction on the side of the airplane, and the suction is used to drive an air-driven gyroscope. And it's the only thing in the airplane that can be used to indicate any kind of stability or rate of turn. That's essentially the only instrument in the airplane, not counting gas gauge, oil pressure gauge, that kind of thing. But it if you ever need it, the only time you'd use it is if you flew in a cloud. But if you go in a cloud and ice that thing over, then it doesn't work anyway. But that's it.
Right.
That's the flight instrument on the airplane. That's it.
And people probably wouldn't know the difference, but we're not talking about an artificial horizon, which which way is up and down. We're talking about a turn needle, a little needle that goes back and forth. And,
yeah,
I mean, but if you've been where Eric and I have been, you'd do anything to never end up in the weather with just that turn and slip, turn and fall and trouble thing. Oh my God, it's amazing. So, well, thanks for going down memory lane with me, Eric. It's cool. It's like flying in a kite, basically.
Yeah.
And lots of fun. So, okay. So I guess we should get on with it. People forget why they showed up here. But anyway, couldn't resist that opportunity. So here we are again. Welcome to our Tuesday night show, Fearless Flight Live. As I said, totally at your disposal here. And we want you to, as always, we want you to join us and put some comments in there if you're watching us live. Put some comments in there if you're watching the replay and let us know. Birds of a feather, big, booming, and growing. And we certainly have reached critical mass on that. If you have not joined, please consider it. That's the first thing I tell anybody that comes to me for coaching or anything is join that. And it's really fun to watch the interchange and the camaraderie and the sense of cohesion that people build for each other. Tonight, we're going to talk about, in the news still, this whole thing about restoring confidence. When we get on these stages where, and Boeing admittedly led this whole thing off, they about 5 years ago now since the MAX 8 thing, but they've been dribbling in and out. And of course, what they do is they keep our eyes fixed on the ball that says, keep watching this and pay attention to all this stuff that's happening in aviation. So we're going to try to honor the fact that even though Eric and I have a different point of view on this, we appreciate the fact that gives you the heebie-jeebies when you see articles that suggest that the aviation system is not only unsafe, but going to hell in a handbasket. And that's not true. We're going to try to give you some confidence, but ultimately you'll have to be the one that makes that decision on your own. We're going to talk a little bit about the 201 monthly group coaching webinar. Next one coming up May 16th, 6:30 p.m. Pacific, 9:30 Eastern. And what we want is we want to hear from you. What do you want to know more about? Please, if you got any ideas tonight, put them in the comments. We're taking all takers, and we want your information. The 101 in person and online are back after a couple months absence, and we got the link up there, and then as always, we want your questions and comments. Just a little bit about this thing. We're gonna publish a blog post on this. And we started to talk about this last Thursday in the monthly coaching group. Some people came to us with some bona fide concerns about how can I treat this? How can I get my confidence back when I see all these articles in the news? So I put together a blog post, collaborated with Eric a bit on this, and our friend from the past, Arnold Barnett, who many of you have seen him on our show. He was on it, I think the first month of the year here in January. And if you might want to go back and take a look at that, because Arnold's one of the leading people out there. He's a statistician and the Sloan Institute at MIT, and he happens to be a former fearful flyer himself, And the way he got over it was he took his profession and just started grabbing data, mining data on this to show why it is the safest way to travel. And these are some facts. These are the latest that in the most recent research that he's done. And this whole thing about your chances of dying in a crash in a first-tier country, that's US, EU, China, Japan, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and Israel, are 1 in 33.2 million. And that means that you'd have to fly once a day, every day for 91,000 years to be exposed to that risk. And in his latest thing, because of all the headlines here with Boeing and all of the faux pas that they've made, he looked back and he did some interesting research. He looked at the number of accidents and fatalities back 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago. And then he projected those forward. In other words, let's just say there were X number of airplanes that crashed and people died in 50 years ago. And then he said, if we had been flying if we expanded the amount of commercial aviation and brought it forward today, I think, what was it here? It's like 12,000 people a year would be dying if we killed people off at the same rate that we did 50 years ago. And it was just another way to look at that. And it was fairly impressive.
I think the amazing number there is 6 times safer than 30 years ago. I mean, they had jet planes 30 years ago, and you and I were flying them.
Yeah, that's our career. Yeah.
So I guess now that we're not flying them, it's 6 times safer. But whatever.
Exactly.
I mean, that's that's a crazy number.
Yeah, it is, and it's getting safer. It just is. And when you look at, of course, the space program made a lot of the technology. It drove a lot of the technology and the lighter weights and things like that. But it really is the number one benefactor outside of the space program was aviation. I mean, we got everything from safety to technology and all kinds of things there. So, and the paradox of aviation news is it makes the news because it's so rare. If airplanes crashed every day, one, we wouldn't be flying at all probably, but two, you wouldn't pay as much attention to it. But because it is so safe, it grabs people's attention, and we like to think that we're safe when we get into someplace like an airplane, and of course we all have this need for control, and that's one of the things that makes it more difficult. A couple of things, these are just pick a choice or pick a headline, any headline, and there were 2 this week. One was involving some planes at JFK. So if you look at this, it says people are wondering what's going on. Well, of course you're wondering what's going on if if you have if your foundation for this or your baseline is that it shouldn't be going on. Yeah, it's gonna startle you. And Eric, talk about this a little bit. Just take some of the edge off of this.
Okay, well these are actually the same problem repeating itself, and is, as Ron said, an extreme rarity. And I was going to talk to you guys just for fun last week, and we got busy about who we are talking to at which phase of flight. We'll do that on a different show, but for the purposes of this problem here, we're talking about the tower controller and the ground controller. And the tower controller is talking to airplanes just arbitrarily within 10 miles when they are lined up or very close to lined up to final approach and landing, and he clears them to land and then clears them off the runway. The tower controller also clears them onto the runway and clears them to take off and hands them to a departure controller about 5 miles away. The ground controller is handling all the movements on the ground away from the ramp or the parking space, and he picks up the airplanes when they have exited the runway and are going to figure out how to taxi in. And what happened on this problem here is exactly the same thing at 2 different airports. A ground controller had cleared an airplane to cross a runway that the tower controller had just previously cleared another airplane to take off on, which is a serious, serious problem and a breakdown in communication between the ground controller and the tower controller, the right hand not knowing what the left hand is doing. That being said, they caught the mistake instantly, and the pilots of all the airplanes involved saw it, and the airplane taking off was at very low energy in both cases, and rejected the takeoff. There was no, it was reported as close call and so on and so forth. It's not true at all. The airplanes are barely moving. They rejected the takeoff, but it is a serious breakdown in communication. And I believe I read somewhere that immediately they're changing the rest periods for the controllers due to the staffing levels, increasing the rest period and frequency of rest periods, hopefully to prevent this kind of thing right away, to do something right away to prevent this kind of thing from happening just from controller fatigue, this breakdown in communication.
Yeah. And the Eric and I happen to know the fella who used to be, he was a pilot at US Airways, and then he got involved in the Airline Pilot Association, and then eventually got on the National Transportation Safety Board and ended up as the chairman. So he's a fairly experienced guy, and he's seen it all. And his name's Bob Suwal. And he made a statement on this. He said, I try to make the point that our commercial, this is on top of these two incidents, and particularly he was responding to the second one there, which was Southwest and JetBlue at Washington Reagan. And he says, I try to make the point that our commercial aviation system in the US is quite safe, despite some hiccups. And don't get me wrong, the hiccups that we've seen lately are not acceptable, but I think it's worthwhile to keep things in perspective. And I read a statistic that someone would have to board a flight at random for something like 100,000 years. And he's quoting, he doesn't even know it, but he's quoting our friend Arnold Barnett. That's his work before they would, statistically speaking, be killed in a U.S. scheduled airline. I say these things with the caveat that a lack of accidents isn't necessarily an indication of a lack of accidents isn't necessarily an indication of a safe system. But I believe that recent added fears are unfounded there, and that's certainly what I feel, and I think Eric would say the same. You know, the fact that it makes the news.
We got a question here, Ron.
Okay,
Ron,
go ahead.
We got a question here, and the question is: so if it is a near disaster, and
no, I love that. I love that term. How do you have a near disaster? Right? Okay.
Yeah.
Or near miss.
Yeah, near miss, whatever it may be. Is it a breakdown of communication, or is it a technical problem where two systems weren't talking? So that's a question. So is it a breakdown in communication, or is it, we don't really know? Is that correct?
I love it when I can answer two questions with one word. Yes.
So we don't really know.
So what that means is they're investigating this. And that's one of the things. If you look at the CBS's coverage of this Southwest accident here, maybe I can grab the link and put it in the notes here. It's one of the most responsible reporting incidents that I've seen. The reporter there did a great job, and I say that because Gail King was one of the people at the table, and Gail is a longtime fearful flyer, and she gets spooked about her own shadow. And so she's going, as they're talking about this and the guy's reporting, she's saying, oh, I'm not going to do, I don't like that. What's going on with this and all that? And the reporter, he could have gone either way. But what he said was, he pointed out the things that we talk about. Aviation, it won't get pushed under the rug. We treat incidents like accidents. That's why it's the safest way to travel on the planet. And so it's one of the real bright spots in reporting, I thought, the way that NBC reporter handled that. So, yeah. So we'll find out when they get done with the report, and there will be a final report. But by that time, nobody died, nobody crashed, no metal was bent. So when that comes out, how many people you think will see that? Maybe 1 in a million compared to the people who saw the headline. Okay. And, and I'm a big believer. The story you tell yourself determines the kind of life you lead. So if you tell yourself, oh my God, everything's going to hell in a handbasket, you definitely shouldn't get on an airplane because you got no conflicting information or no countering information. And it's not going to be a fun thing to do. So, okay. So
I would not
ahead.
have be the captain or the first officer on that Swiss Air flight at JFK with a grand total of 4 airplanes crossing in front of him with my filter on my mouth, which is not much. I think I probably would have had something in the voice recorder like, really? Anybody else? Fuel truck? Touch
Yeah.
it? Come on. Why not? Yeah.
Yeah. And the reporter, one last thing, and the reporter that covered this on the show with Gail King was, he said, this is also proof that the system worked. You
Yeah.
know, the biggest thing about the time in our careers for Eric and I was one, we quit pretending, the FAA officially quit pretending that we don't make mistakes. Honest to God, that was the mindset. We were supposed to believe that if we could do things perfectly enough, there wouldn't be any mistakes. And that continually killed people. What happened was once we admitted we made mistakes, now they actually took the penalty off of innocent, because pilots don't go out there and intentionally try to kill themselves and their passengers. They're the first ones to the scene of the accident. So they're worried about their own safety. And so when pilots would make mistakes, instead of punishing us, what they did was they came up with a system where we could tell on ourselves, even with things that did not make the public record. And what happened? Safety started getting better, even better and beyond. And so that's the beauty of aviation, is the way we treated human factors. So now we put as much or more emphasis on trying to catch our mistakes before they become consequential. So that's part of our training now, not just how to do it right, but what to do to constantly keep checking yourself, looking at your own process to make sure that you have a better chance of catching mistakes if you make them. So they just put this in here because Boeing's the one that keeps this in the news right now. And the reality is they're a foundation, they're a pillar of the aviation industry. I mean, there's two major manufacturers, Boeing and Airbus. And while there's been some despicable things that have happened here, they can't afford to keep operating this way. Forget about the safety; they can't afford it because they'll go out of business. And you have to take what even the whistleblowers, I think, you have to take with a grain of salt sometimes, because I'm not bad mouthing any of them, but we will make some significant enhancements, as the third bullet point says there, and we'll get better. We always get better. Okay. So what do? You educate yourself. You interrupt your thinking by distracting or disrupting, and you join a community of fearful flyers. Sound familiar? Yeah, that's because it's the fearless flight method, and that's why we put that together like that, because that's how you get over it. That's how you get on airplanes. And while the fear of flying is real and valid, it's essential to balance fears with facts, and that's the bottom line for anything that we teach about in Fearless Flight. Air travel continues to be one of the safest ways to reach your destination, and it really is the safest way. I mean, I say, it's safer than walking. More people will be killed as pedestrians than will die in airplane crashes, for sure. And whether you're on board a Boeing or any other aircraft, the priority of the industry is your safety, because it's frankly bad business to kill passengers. It just doesn't do well for selling tickets down there. Okay. Keep your questions coming, and what if you're sitting there at your keyboard, don't be bashful. We want to know, I haven't picked a topic yet for next month's monthly webinar. So we want to know, what are some of the things that you want to know about? What burning questions that you have? What would it help to number one thing to help you get over your fear of flying? What would it be? So send them to us, email, put them in the remarks, or any way you can get them to us. We want to know what you want to know. And the next webinar is coming up on May 16th. And 6:30 p.m. Pacific, 9:30 p.m. Eastern. We had the biggest attendance, not only registrations, but the most number of people that showed up for the last one. And I think you'll agree with what they did. It was well worth their time to do that. It's a mix between us talking about and throwing some information out there to help people think in different terms. And it's also an opportunity for us to work with people one-on-one who come there with issues that they want to talk about. And the best thing about the monthly webinar is it's monthly. And because, as I alluded to at the beginning, for most people, this is a process, and getting on your next flight is certainly a goal, but getting you on that flight a year from now when you haven't flown in between is also one of our goals. So you don't have to go back to square one all the time. This is
Ron, we got a couple of questions, and
Okay.
and I'm gonna I'm gonna make one comment. So the first question, or I guess statement, what to cover in the next monthly group coaching webinar is flying over water.
Okay.
Because that person is going to Europe and there is
Okay.
a big body of water in the way. And the next question was, how do you work with a fear of heights when flying? I'm flying on Friday to Nashville. So that's a very timely question, which won't be a webinar question necessarily, but if you can speak to that. And then I also want to just affirm Tracy. Tracy, if you can't remember, that's actually a good thing, because maybe between now and your next flight, you might even have forgotten that you have a fear of flying. How is that for using that for you? But yeah, Ron, if you can talk to Sharon's
Sure.
question of fear of
Sure.
heights.
Well, we'll talk about the heights. Very common to be afraid of height and have it projected onto flying. And it's obvious, when you're in an airplane, if you think about the fact that you're going to be at 35,000 feet, that's high. Holy cow. And, I tell people, if you were on a 35,000 foot step ladder, it would be frightening to me too, because, I can't get up on an 8-foot step ladder and stand on the top without feeling a little bit vulnerable, because it's not the same as it is standing on the ground. And one of our good friends, Jim has since left the planet here, but Jim White, when Eric and I knew him well, Jim was terrified of heights. He was 6'4", so I used to joke with him, "You're already up in the clouds. What are you worried about heights?" But he couldn't get above the first rung on a ladder. And I know other pilots who were afraid of heights. But so the story they tell themselves is not that they're at 35,000 feet. The story they tell themselves is they're in a chair in the air at 35,000 feet. And it was a great, Louis, what was his name? He was a comedian, fell out of favor because of the Me Too movement, but he had a great routine he said, we should all just be screaming joy every time we fly, because you're sitting in a chair in the air at 35,000 feet, going from point A to point B, when in the days of the pilgrims and the pioneers, it would have taken them 2 years and half the people would have died before they got there. And now we can do that in 4 hours. And so that's the beauty of aviation. But heights is something that, like a lot of things, we talk about the elephant and the rider. The elephant is our intuitive mind. Well, your intuitive mind says it can't be safe if you're up in the air at 35,000 feet. So your rider, that little logical part of your brain, has to take over and say, "That's okay. Calm down. I know it's unsettling to you, but think about it. The way we got into the air was not climbing up on a ladder. We got there through technology and reliability and safety practices and all that. So stick with us and we'll keep talking about it." So what I would do when I coach with people that are talking about their fear of heights is I invite them to tell me, what's the story you tell yourself? Okay. If you tell yourself that you're vulnerable of falling out at 35,000 feet and hitting the ground, which would certainly be fatal, stop it, because that's not going to happen. You don't do that. Okay. Over water. Eric flew over water as part of his career. What was your biggest, why don't you worry, Eric, about flying over water? What are some of the common things that we do to make that safe?
Well, we have when companies want to start flying new engine airplanes for water, they made proposals to the FAA and said, here's why we should be able to do this: because of engine reliability, the system's redundancy in these airplanes. And the FAA said, okay, well, if you're going to do this, we're going to make a special set of rules governing flight over water. You're going to have to be specially qualified. the company will have a special dispatch department that handles that and monitors the flight the whole time. You will essentially be an airline with an airline and a fleet within the fleet with these airplanes that are certified to what we call ETOPS standards, which I always get wrong. Ron, what does ETOPS stand for? What? Because
Extended Twin Engine Operating Procedures.
Yes, that's it. A slang for it that you guys won't. But nevertheless, these airplanes are certified with inspection intervals, redundancies, things that the airplanes, quote unquote, the normal domestic fleet don't have, with a special department in maintenance to manage it and a special department in dispatch, and the pilots going through special training, all to make over water launches. And the FAA said, okay, if you're in compliance with this, then you could do that. And they have not, they nor any of the airlines have not been proven wrong. That works very, very well with an exceedingly high rate of reliability. And
yeah, so you take all of the regular things that make flying so safe, and then you add higher levels of compliance for the airplanes, higher levels of compliance and training for the crews and the mechanics that operate and maintain those, higher levels of compliance for the people who monitor the actual flow of the airplanes when they're over water. And that's how, and the reason we do that is because we don't want anything to happen, even more so when we're over water than we do other times, because there isn't as many places to land. But even that goes into it, because we have, you're never without a place and an amount of time for which that airplane was certified to be able to get you from where it is to safely on a suitable alternate airport. Okay, so you might not end up at your destination that particular day, but you're not going to end up in the drink. So, all right. Any other questions, Dieter?
There's a question about what happens when, and maybe I should just there's a little side talk going on about thunderstorms. So
Yep.
are thunderstorms likely when you fly over water? More likely, less likely? And are they being dealt with in any other way if you fly over water versus if you encounter a thunderstorm over land? So that's actually a cool question.
If you're somewhere in the air over the planet Earth, you can have thunderstorms. Now, there is some consideration to certain time. You know, if you've lived in the United States all your life, you know that we get these big fronts coming down from Canada. Oh, that's my Alexa's talking to me. We have these big fronts that come down from Canada. It mixes with cold, heavy weight, cold air, mixes with lighter, warm, moist air, and it causes weather. And that's what, you know, until we got into the climate change stuff, that's what kept the planet green and vital for us all. When you get, there are some places over the Earth, help me with this, they're intertropical ITZ zone. It's the zone around the Earth, around the equator. So if you look at the equator going around the Earth, if you look at how much of the equator is over water, it's about 3/4 of it. So there's more water over or under around the equator than there is any other place on the planet. So that tends to be a special part of the planet where there are more thunderstorms than you might see over other continents and all that. But again, we manage those just like we manage any other weather. We have weather radar, we have training, we have rules that we have to abide by, and we flight plan to avoid it as best we can. And we don't fly through thunderstorms. Go ahead.
So a lot of times going out over the Pacific or the Atlantic, that kind of thing's a rarity. But if it shows up, we deal with it. My buddies who would fly to Miami and Dallas, South America, across the equator and through that area, and there would be violent weather there absolutely every night, every time, with the mixing of the air masses between the two hemispheres. It would always have weather, and they would deal with it on every single flight segment.
And Dieter and Eric know, I have a son He's crazier than a loon. And his life goal was to get a sailboat, 52 foot, it turns out, and sail somewhere into the world. And so he's halfway between the coast of Mexico and on his way to the French Polynesia islands down there. And he just wrote me today and told me where he's at. And he's actually today and tomorrow, he's passing through the equator. So he's in that area. And fortunately, he has access to Elon Musk's satellite, so he could talk to people. I mean, I can sit here and on WhatsApp and can have a real-time conversation with him. It's the craziest thing. But anyway, he just happens to be going through the ITCZ. That's how I remembered the initials, because he just wrote me an email today. But anyway, so thunderstorms, they just are. And it's just another thing that we deal with, no less than flying over water for extended periods of time. But the best way is to ask questions as you did, and keep asking the question. I don't care how many times you have to ask that question until your little rider says, okay, we got it. Okay. And he calms the elephant and he says, it's okay. You can get worried. Don't worry. But we're here and we're going to keep you safe. So that's what we do. All right.
All right. I got one other question to end the show. Go ahead first. And
I was just going to say, I just wanted to feature the Fearless Flyer Club membership. I showed you the slide before that shows the various levels that you can join, and they all have different things that go along with them. I just put together this new matrix that shows what the benefits are, and we'll be publishing that as well. We would love to have you join us. I think it's the best thing that we have to offer right now, and Fearless Flight is the opportunity to get together each month with other people like yourself and for common reasons, and that is to overcome your fear of flying. The last thing I want to talk about before we go is we are back in force with the Fear of Flying Clear for Takeoff 101, both the in-person version, which I hold every month, except for a couple months during the summer, at Sky Harbor Airport, 6 o'clock to 8 o'clock on a Southwest Airplanes. The next one will be coming up Saturday, May 4th. So if you're in or live around or will be in the Phoenix area and you want to join us, please do. It's free. And you go to this link here, and this link will lead you to either one. If you're not here in Phoenix and you cannot attend live with us, or even if you can and you want to do more, I have another free webinar on Sunday morning following the night before the class at the airport. And that's called Clear for Takeoff 101 online. And that's an hour. It's an opportunity to get free information and get your questions asked. So join us either if you live anywhere but Phoenix, join us for the online class. If you're in the Phoenix area or will be in the Phoenix area, we'd love to have you come out for the class there. So, okay. That's kind of winds up the formal stuff there. Any final remarks?
Yeah, so actually there are two more questions. One's really quick, and I'll let Eric or maybe Eric, why don't you take that one? Tracy's asking so her daughter flew from LAX to Switzerland, and how come that she flew over to Switzerland in such a arc that she would go all the way to Greenland? And so I'll let you take this first. Go ahead.
So Tracy, I know you're very bright, and you know the Earth isn't flat. The globe is round, and so when the airplane takes off, it is, rather than going on a straight line across the map, it is going to make an arc as it goes a very long ways around the globe. That's number one. Number two is they probably wanted to get way up north. It's late in the winter season, and the jet stream is very far up north, and they wanted to be up north to get into the best tailwinds they could, making a tremendous difference on time and fuel economy going. And the third reason is because all the people that went to Europe are eventually coming back, including some of the Europeans. And when they build the tracks and every day, the people coming back towards the United States are down south a little bit on the tracks. There we go. Are down south a little bit, and the airplanes going over to Europe are arcing up on the north side. That way, the airplanes going to Europe take advantage of the winds, and the airplanes coming to the eastern seaboard of the United States are south of the headwinds and stay out of it. And those routes are constructed like that every 24 hours. And that's why she flew such a big arc to get over to Switzerland.
Well, and a bigger reason is it's called the Great Circle Route. So if you take the Earth, let's assume that the surface of this globe here had a zipper on it, and we unzip it and then press it out flat. That's called a Mercator projection. I don't know how was that in the 1500s, 1600, whenever Mercator was around.
1671 or something.
Yeah.
There you go. So we had this guy that figured out if you want to make a flat map out of this, you can do it, but when you press it flat, it's going to distort the curves of the Earth. So the way you can demonstrate this is if you can get a globe and you put a string on the end. Let's say you wanted to fly from Las Vegas or from Los Angeles to London up here, okay? And getting distorted there. So you can see if I tip, whoops, get rid of that. If you tip down this way, you can see a straight line would be right over across there. That's why they go over Greenland, because that's the shortest distance. If you were if you were coming off the East Coast, you go a little bit south of that, okay? But the further west you are, or the further around the other side of the globe you are, the more you fly over the pole. Or if you're in the southern hemisphere, there are a few places. If you're flying from Australia to Africa and stuff, you would do the same thing, flying closer to the South Pole over there. But the shortest distance between 2 points on a globe is a Great Circle Route. So it's like you slice through the Earth between those 2 points, and that's why you go so far north over there. When I came back from Tel Aviv, oh my gosh, way down in here, we went pretty close to the Arctic Circle. We were going nonstop back to LA. And and people worry about landing in the water. I thought, geez, what I was really impressed with, I woke up, I remember in the middle of the night, and I looked out on a 787, and those engines were just cooking just fine. I said, man, I'm so grateful for technology, because even if we had to land on Greenland and landed successfully, what are you going to do when you get there, man? There ain't nothing down there. So whether it's water that you're going to end up in or barren land, you still want that airplane to work reliably. And thank gosh we live in this era when it's never been safer to fly. And just in my lifetime, it's just amazing to see what has happened in aviation. And I'm sure everybody kind of feels that way, but in particular in aviation, gosh, it's incredible. So I feel really blessed. Okay. So
all right,
what did we say tonight?
We gotta have the geek question from Dawn, because I love it. Dawn saying, how do pilots manage and avoid microbursts that were a factor in some of the unfortunate crashes, especially Dallas back in 1985? I imagine there are ways to avoid these now, right?
Yes, there are.
Delta 191, Dallas, 1985. Do I know about that? Yeah, we used to teach it. How many times do you listen to me talk about that, Eric, and recurring?
Yeah. There's been tremendous changes in both the onboard radars, and the airplanes have Doppler shift capability detecting that stuff, and they can detect wind shears in front of the airplane and enunciate it. And then it will not only do that, it will give you commands as to how to pitch the airplane to best fly through one if you have to. But hopefully you never have to do that, only in training, because the airports now have the same technology where they are measuring with Doppler shift radars around the field in a 5 to 10 mile radius locally, and can detect all kinds of wind shifting going on, and they will give you wind shear alerts if they have big boundary differences in winds. So the right answer now is we just don't get into it because of detection equipment on the field and in the airplane that we did not have in the early 90s.
Yep. And maybe that's something we should talk about. People, we're all voyeurs. We all want to know. We can't avoid looking at a crash when we're on the freeway. Maybe that if you're interested, if you would like to learn, if you'd like to have us talk about past airplane accidents, I know you guys watch Great Airplane Disasters. How about if we do it with a little supervision next time? So right now it won't take much support. I will gin up some content for the next webinar in May. We'll talk about that accident in particular that Don just referenced. And what we'll do is the way we will approach it is the way we approach it for recurrent training for pilots. We talk about what happened and what we learned. And that's why it doesn't happen again.
Maybe we do that. Greatest aviation disasters and improvements. You know, like we're focusing on what's actually come out of it. Because I think as far as I understand most of these shows, and Don said he's gonna wean himself off a little bit of these shows, is those shows never really you know, like keel out what exactly we implemented so that these types of accidents don't happen anymore. So I think that's a great idea, Ron.
And Don and I had a conversation the other day, and I was flirting with that. And okay. So you can probably count on it next week.
2 thumbs up already here. So
all right, so we'll talk about it. Everybody likes a crash, man, right? As long as you're not in it. So we'll talk about crashing and you'll get, oh man, Eric and you'll get us going and we won't be able to stop probably, but we'll talk about it. We'll talk about that.
I have a gal pal who's a gifted eye surgeon. She's quite brilliant. And I poured a little truth serum in her one night. She's a very nervous flyer. And she admitted to me that she reads NTSB reports. And I said, Elizabeth, number one, don't do that anymore. Number two, don't tell people you do that anymore. So I don't know if I've made any headway with her on that, but yeah, those are points. Don't read that stuff.
So bring your voyeur with you to May 16th, and we'll see if we can't satisfy you. We'll pique your interest at least, and we'll talk about some of the greatest aviation accidents of all time. All right. And with that, thanks for joining us tonight. Thanks, Eric. Thanks, Dieter. And we will see you again next week for the latest edition of Fearless Flight Live. Have a great week, everybody. And come back, see us next week.
Good night, guys.